Quote, "Frankly, Smash doesn't need vigilante keyboard warriors, or YouTubers who profit from drama, or even top players speaking out. Smash needs organized, trained, and supported adults to handle instances of misconduct in professional, private, and consistent ways. Twitter justice doesn't work. Twitter is a place where shitty humans go to get their story trending first, or otherwise weaponize young Smash community members who want a taste of justice against their victims or enemies. Even victims lose on Twitter when their abuser is popular. Smash needs to pay people to specifically address misconduct or otherwise supervise the community, offer safety nets or backup for when those people need a break from making difficult decisions about traumatic content, and make it all a priority." Unquote. Kyle Nola, PhD, aka Dr. Piggy, representative of the Smash Community's Code of Conduct panel. I will not be monetizing this video because I refuse to be in a position where I profit from other people's trauma. The other day, Splatoon Competitive Community Safety, or Splat Safety for short, tweeted out a decision on a lifetime ban for a player who had been accused of, among other things, grooming a minor for a romantic relationship. It was considered a level 5 offense, the most severe category on the Code of Conduct that Splat Safety enforces. This sparked a lot of criticism on Twitter, because someone said, and then everyone repeated, that the report had been made in 2020, and therefore that it had taken 3 years for the decision to be made. Now, Splatoon players on Twitter don't have the best track record about getting the facts straight. In the document containing evidence collected about this harmful individual, for example, one of the timestamps says 2021. Maybe that piece of evidence was added to the Google document after the report was made? I'm not sure. But I definitely wouldn't be parroting that it happened in 2020 until I investigated that further, and I really don't think the people who were repeating that fact had actually looked into it that carefully. While those facts are somewhat important to their criticism, and many members of the community are showing a very frustrating lack of willingness to do due diligence and understand what they're talking about before they misinform someone, I do also empathize with their situation. Even just 2 years is an extremely long time for a decision to be made. From the perspective of a typical community member who hadn't heard about any of this and is only finding out about it on Twitter, it's understandable to be frustrated by Splat Safety. It is an organization whose members are anonymous, making it seem like, without oversight, they have unchecked power. They make decisions very slowly compared to how quickly tournament organizers, Discord owners, and other community leaders can act to remove dangerous people from the scene. We don't get to see how those decisions are being made. Lots of people on Twitter criticize them every time they do something. Based on that information alone, it makes sense that some people feel distrust toward them. But that's the problem. That information alone is nowhere near enough to have an informed opinion. The responsible thing to do when you have that little information is not to share your uninformed opinion. It is your responsibility when you have an uninformed opinion either to seek out enough information to have an informed opinion or not to share your opinion at all, accepting your ignorance of the situation and allowing people who are not ignorant about it to make the judgment calls instead. It is very healthy not to accept ignorance, not to allow others to make decisions that affect you. So what I want to do, rather than just tell someone you don't know what you're talking about, is to help people have a more informed opinion. I am in a position to do some needed journalism on the subject. I have been a tournament organizer in the Smash scene that benefited from the Smash Code of Conduct that Splat Safety is based on, and I have also spoken directly to multiple signatory Splatoon TOs and Splat Safety itself in the last 24 hours about this subject. This story, as with many aspects of the Splatoon community, actually starts with competitive Super Smash Bros. While all this information pertains to Smash, since Splatoon's system is based on it, we can say that much of this is true for us as well. Source for the information on the gathering I'm about to talk about in a link in the description. In 2018, a group of 20-something of the tournament organizers, or TOs for short, of the largest Smash tournaments in the world, the most influential leaders of the community, held a meeting to deliberate and come up with a universal rule set for the global community to follow. This way, competition would be standardized anywhere you played the game. At that meeting, the one female TO present spoke up requesting that, in addition to in-game and tournament rules, that a list of rules for participant behavior also be established to help keep the community safe. Everyone in the room decided that they were not qualified to make such a document, so it was agreed that a task force would be constructed of people who were qualified to construct what eventually became the Smash Code of Conduct. Therefore, while this Code of Conduct panel would consist of people other than TOs, they were delegated to by the TOs. They were understood to represent the TOs, and the TOs were the source of the power that enforced the Code of Conduct. Dr. Piggy, the writer of the opening quotation, took on something of a leadership position, in part because, as someone in academia, they had access to academic databases they could search to find relevant research and best practices. They researched what other communities were doing and found whatever they could in the databases and compiled it into a list of rules and a plan for enforcement. The system worked like this. The Code of Conduct was a list of rules for participants and a list of consequences that varied by the severity of the rule being broken. The consequences tended to be bans of various lengths against that player from participating in future events. Less severe offenses might only lead to temporary suspensions from participating, or even just verbal documented warnings. More serious offenses could result in lifetime bans. These consequences were not enforced by the Code of Conduct panel, but by the TOs who delegated the investigation to them. That's a really important aspect of the working relationship to understand, and something that people are often missing in the current discussion. TOs had no legal imperative forcing them to adhere to the Code of Conduct, but what the Code of Conduct did was enable the biggest TOs in the scene to hold other TOs accountable for not keeping their communities safe. See, when it came out that a well-known player in a community was abusive, a lot of TOs would deflect those accusations, be irrationally skeptical of the evidence, use plausible deniability, do whatever it took, rationalize however they could so they didn't have to ban one of their friends or strongest players. If they signed on, became a signatory TO, now the Code of Conduct panel could say that they had conducted a more thorough investigation than just about any TO knew how to conduct, deliberated more than just about any TO had time to deliberate, and had come to a particular conclusion. The TO who had signed on would be breaking the agreement and acting in spite of contrary evidence that everyone knew they had access to by refusing to enforce the ban. If they didn't agree to the terms of the Code of Conduct at all, not being a signatory TO was something other TOs could use to communicate to people in the community that they did not have confidence the events being run there were safe for everyone. Since the Code of Conduct was a global organization, it played a major role in stopping ban evasion. Ban lists could be enforced by every signatory TO, because now, if a player moved or happened to be out of state and tried to compete again despite their ban, even a TO that had never seen them before would have the information they need to identify them and remove them from the event to protect their community. That sort of inter-regional communication was a lot more difficult and inconsistent without the central authority of the Code of Conduct panel and their ban list. The Code of Conduct panel also had a reporting mechanism that allowed members of the community to privately report issues of abuse in a way that would be treated as confidentially as possible to protect them from retaliation by the abuser. This way, even if a TO were not to be trusted to investigate the situation effectively or in a way that protected the victim, there was still a way for the information to come to light nonetheless, and for that TO to be able to receive a well-considered decision and enforce consequences based on it. Now competitors had a way of knowing that if something happened at an event, they definitely had someone to reach out to that would take them seriously, and that, provided the evidence led to that conclusion, someone unsafe at that event would see consequences. Something that's important to understand about situations of abuse is that much of the investigation cannot become public. It is impossible for the system to function effectively that way. Abusers frequently threaten their victims with retaliation if the victim tells anyone about it. Making a public call-out just can't happen in a lot of cases for reasons like this. I'm sure the public would love the transparency, but it is completely unsafe for the victim to allow curious people to peer in sometimes. It would also only make things worse for the victim a lot of the time because people would do hurtful things with that information. Bad faith actors, like the perpetrator's friends, would harass the victim or make poorly reasoned arguments and try to convince other less informed onlookers to take the wrong side. Uninformed opinions would circulate widely and seem to have more of a basis in fact. Unchecked, people might start blaming the victim, thinking they made false accusations and effectively end up enforcing a ban via public opinion on the victim and not their perpetrator. This isn't just a theory of how it happens. This is a pattern of behavior that has happened time and time again. Also, the panelists who undertook the investigation would be subject to harassment from these same people, the bad actors and the uninformed people who believed them. We've seen in the past couple days what it's like just when people lash out at Splat Safety. Imagine what would happen if people knew who the panelists were individually. Someone might start stalking them, doxing them, digging up personal information and making very specific threats, swatting them. This is the reason the public doesn't know who exactly is on Splat Safety. They are the people charged with doing something that the worst, most abusive people in the community don't like. And if they were known every time a case closed, they would have to deal with that abuse being aimed their way. This initiative, the Smash Code of Conduct panel, was a healthy and mature development in the scene, something I'm very proud happened in the Smash community. Splatoon organizers seemed to agree, as in June of 2020, they drafted a code of conduct with signatory TOs, a direct reference to the work the Smash community had been ironing out for some time at that point. They are not the same organization. The draft of the rules was done independently, but it is obviously very heavily inspired by that same initiative. It is important to note, though, that Smash's system had a fatal flaw. The Code of Conduct panel were a small group of volunteers that were suddenly responsible for the entire Smash community. Mind you, the Smash community is much larger than even the Splatoon community, and this small group of volunteers who, by nature of being the kind of mature adults you trust with situations like this, had lives, had jobs, were very involved in other things. Moderators on social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, their companies end up needing to provide therapy to them just because they need support for their mental health to be able to do their job. These people are routinely, deliberately seeking out and witnessing the worst actions, words, images, videos that people can produce. It's draining, numbing, dangerous to cause someone that much horror and disgust without giving them breaks and mental health support. And that's for people whose paid job it is to be moderators. The Code of Conduct panel also had other jobs. They had lives outside of that work. I haven't been a member of the Smash Code of Conduct panel, but I was a TO in Arizona while they were active and took part in a couple investigations for my scene. We were a pretty safe scene and most cases were pretty open and shut, but even so, that process is nerve-wracking. Every time your phone goes off, you have to check Discord because something too important to ignore is going on. It's a matter of people's safety, something that feels more important than your work, your hobbies, something you have to do just because it's a responsibility that you feel to your fellow human beings. Even in those few situations I handled where I was well supported, where no one tried to harass me for our decision, where the consequences enacted were adhered to and never challenged, every time I pulled my phone out of my pocket to check, my hand was shaking. That level of stress can easily take over your life. If you're handling too many cases, it could just keep you in that state of stress all the time. And that destroys your body and your mental health. It's something you cannot overdo. You need to take care of yourself first so you don't ruin your ability to help others. But there's also the pressing thought, as you try to take the breaks you need, that people need your help, need that intervention, are counting on you to protect them from abuse. Without the staffing to give you the break you need and know that people are being helped in the meantime, without having enough people on board that someone's got you covered, it can become too much. I've thought for a long time about what I would want Nintendo to do if they were to start really supporting us, not just using us for content marketing. The first thing that comes to mind for me is not for them to add money to a prize pool or to sponsor teams or players or content creators. I would want them to approach Dr. Piggy and ask them, how much money do you need? Then provide them everything they asked for budget to do so that they could hire and train professional code of conduct panelists and continue their work of keeping the scene safe. And I'd want Nintendo to extend that program to include the Splatoon scene and any other esport they're involved in supporting. They will never do this because at some point someone would whip up a scandal and then people would be seeing dollar signs and trying to sue Nintendo for the conduct of an abusive person at their tournaments, and their lawyers will try to avoid that. But I genuinely think that this is the best thing that they could do for us. I believe in it that much. Dr. Piggy and the Code of Conduct panel never got the support they needed before July of 2020 happened. In July of 2020, a player came forward with an accusation against someone who had groomed them at Smash tournaments, and it became very publicized. When it was taken seriously, other victims of abuse started coming forward too, and the chain reaction resulted in a miniature Me Too movement happening in the competitive Smash scene. I want to be clear. When victims come forward, that is a good thing. That is a sign that we are making them feel safe to come forward, that we've created an environment where they feel like they will be protected once the truth is known. It takes bravery and trust on their part. The only thing you could possibly criticize about the accusations being brought forward is that we didn't provide an environment where people felt like the accusations could be brought forward sooner. Memeing on the Smash community for having cases of abuse out in the open is like hating the scab that forms over a wound instead of making sure you're more careful not to cut yourself in the future. This was ugly and uncomfortable, but it was a moment of healing for the community. It forced people to have a lot of uncomfortable but important conversations they had been avoiding. It was not, however, a moment that the Code of Conduct panel could survive. In their statement about disbanding, the Code of Conduct panel said that at the current pace of work they could sustain, it would take 5 to 10 years only to address what came up in the summer of 2020. The volume was too high. They needed funding, they needed hiring, they needed training, and without any reasonable expectation that would happen, they had to fold. They just couldn't make that volume of work fit into their lives. Dr. Piggy has since put a lot of distance between themselves and the Smash community, though there are occasionally times where they will opt to briefly and gently weigh in. I genuinely hope they are very, very happy in whatever they've moved on to doing since then. They're a hero to me, even just for the brief time they oversaw this project. They've helped more people than they can possibly know, because they did more than help the individual cases they oversaw. They shifted the entire culture of the Smash community, and a lot of auxiliary communities to it, like ours, in the process. I am better, and we are better, for their work. This brings us to Splat Safety. There are some current problems and reasonable criticisms that can be made of the program. We've had a lot of turnover in the Splatoon community's panel. Many founding members of Splat Safety, the people who really knew what it was about and were there from the beginning, no longer work for it and have distanced themselves from the community in much the same way and for much the same reason as Dr. Piggy. As with the Smash Code of Conduct folks, Splat Safety people are volunteers. They have jobs outside this, and their other responsibilities cut into the time they could be spending on resolving cases. These are stated problems both by Splat Safety members that I interviewed and by signatory TOs. Since people have been in and out, during transitions, unfinished cases some members were working on had to be rechecked to get their new case managers up to speed. The team also went through a period of inactivity some time ago, and that delay has a ripple effect on cases that are now being formally decided and announced. Major cases that require significant investigation take a lot of time, because investigating means being very diligent with fact-checking. According to a Splat Safety member, there have been multiple instances where evidence found in documents like you might see compiled in the more public accusations have been faked or altered to attack innocent people who have, in reality, done nothing wrong. While false accusations are very rare, and the best policy is always to trust the victim prior to rigorous verification, Splat Safety is a potential source of verification that people are actually as harmful as they're accused of being. That said, because it's a time-consuming process, these bigger cases can cause compounding delays in combination with the previously discussed problems with managing cases effectively. Also remember, like we talked about earlier, just because nothing's being tweeted doesn't mean cases aren't being worked on. Lots of people need to sign off, including, for example, the victim, before a ban is formally announced on Twitter. The lack of an announcement doesn't mean nothing is happening. A lot of cases are decided more privately. Even so, it remains a problem with the system that cases take this long to process. But that's less of a problem than some people seem to think. See, if you remember, signatory TOs are the real source of power behind the code of conduct. That means that they also have discretion to enforce bans without waiting for Splat Safety to confirm them. They're seeing all the documents circulating on Twitter or Discord. They're active in the scene and they know a lot of people, and they're on top of these issues. Just because Splat Safety hasn't tweeted about someone doesn't mean they aren't already banned. If you're worried about an individual being at an event and you've reported it to Splat Safety, but it's only, say, a few days before that event and they probably won't be able to get to it in time, just reach out to the TO, because they're the one who would be enforcing the ban anyway. It's not like they can't refuse the person entry just because Splat Safety hasn't dotted their I's and crossed their T's yet. It's their tournament. They're the source of Splat Safety's power, not the other way around. Individual Discord owners, tournament organizers, and other community leaders are not inhibited by the slowness of Splat Safety. Splat Safety is useful in that it is capable of investigating issues more thoroughly and make decisions with a greater degree of certainty than we can expect of TOs. And while important decisions may be made without that certainty, and the TOs would certainly love for the turnaround time to be much faster than it is, once that judgment comes out, the TOs have the peace of mind that they're making the right decision. And all the TOs now have permanent access to that information, all from one source, instead of being responsible for remembering and spreading that one person's DMs from Discord 5 months ago to enforce a ban. There is certainly more we could be getting out of Splat Safety, but what we are getting has value. And it's being undertaken by a group of people with experience and maturity and the ability to collect all the necessary information to make the right decisions. If you genuinely believe that you have the skill set needed to help them, there's always the option to volunteer, but I would caution you to know what you're getting into. Don't do this because you want power or because you think you can do their job better. Do this because you want to help keep victims of abuse safe. That's the priority that I think is missing on Twitter right now, and that's what I object to most about this discussion. It is a trend that people a generation younger than myself make statements with the intent of getting their friends to jump in and validate them. Posts are made with the intent of getting other people on board, of dogpiling people they think are wrong and hyper-validating people they think are right. I do believe that when misinformation is spread, it's important to have a contrary voice speak up. Even a few dissenters can significantly slow down mob action, stop people from amplifying the misinformation and blowing it up out of proportion. This is why I chose to speak out against what I perceived to be a careless representation of the issue. What I found, though, was that by speaking up, I was also riling people up, incentivizing them to dogpile me and bringing my audience to a conversation they might otherwise not have seen, unintentionally drawing yet more attention to an uninformed opinion. The discourse I spoke out against at times raised concerns that I've called reasonable and addressed earlier in this video. But even when they did, and oftentimes they were pretty poorly informed, half-baked versions of those concerns, they did so with a tone that doesn't work in situations this serious. When you invite your followers to laugh at this, mock someone, dunk on them, you need to remember that the subject in question is someone else's trauma. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their life in all likelihood, and you're trying to get people to laugh. You're trying to crack jokes. You're making something the victim doesn't want to remember into someone else's entertainment. Ideally, instead of it becoming a huge stink on Twitter, a ban is announced, and then that individual ceases to exist from the Splatoon community. No one hears about them again. The victim doesn't have to be reminded of them by anything that remains in the scene. They don't have to feel that sudden rising panic upon hearing their name, a fight-or-flight response suddenly kicking in at a time they're just trying to enjoy themselves. Memeing on the situation does the opposite. A meme is, by definition, something repeatable, something that keeps coming back. I have not named the individual who is banned throughout this video for a reason. I don't say the names of people who I don't want people to remember. The people who have the authority and ability to refuse them entry to our community already have their names on a list and will make sure they don't come back. Saying their name only makes them more remembered. Sometimes it can even make them more popular. There are people who want to do the wrong thing. that look for moments where others like them are able to reach a certain critical mass, able to get enough people ganging up on community leaders, trick some well-meaning people into taking their side, that it might make the community an easier place for them to operate in. Banned players will harass, manipulate, do whatever it takes if they think they stand a chance of skewing public opinion enough against what's regulating them that they could come back. A banned player will enlist their friends to all converge on a conversation to make it seem like there's an overwhelming consensus, when, in fact, they just got every single person who agrees with them in the same place. If we create an opening by criticizing an organization that is operating in good faith to help the community, they may take that opening to try and poison public opinion about the people who told them they couldn't attend tournaments anymore. So if you have criticism of Splat Safety, that's valid, but you need to voice that criticism in a way that can't be co-opted by people who are acting in bad faith to undermine systems that keep people safe. You need to ensure that your criticism is as informed as it can be, so you don't make misinformation go viral and cause confusion. You need to voice that criticism in a way that offers workable alternatives to the way things are, not just complaints that unpaid volunteers with jobs aren't working hard enough. You need to voice that criticism in a way that makes it clear you care about the most important thing: the safety of victims of abuse. Right now, the way arguments are being presented, it makes it sound like some of the community cares more about getting likes on Twitter. Twitter justice doesn't work.